Hey everyone, this is the Mind Perspective podcast, and today I'm Victor Dwyer, and we're going to talk through profitability with Chelsea on So Stocked, and we're just going to go through and just really just talk about it. Right now, inflation's been a big deal. It's been a hot topic. Everyone's talking about how they can become profitable. Things are becoming more expensive. Everyone's afraid to raise their prices, and they don't know what to do. So I'm really excited to talk with Chelsea today and just kind of go through it. Chelsea, thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is my favorite topic as of now.
Yeah, please give us a first intro about who you are and how you got started into e-commerce.
Yeah. So my name is Chelsea Cohen. I am the co-founder and CEO of So Stocked,
Yeah,
and I started selling on Amazon 2014. By 2018, I was trying to solve my own problem with inventory, and really it
hmm
was profitability. Actually, I felt like I wasn't keeping as much of the money that I was
hmm
making, and I felt like I was stocking out, and that was causing problems with revenue. So I built So Stock because I couldn't find a solution, but it was
hmm
always because of the profitability side of things. So that's always been my interest and my passion, and just identifying that inventory is a huge piece of the
yeah,
profitability puzzle.
100%, 100%. And what would you say, just kind of starting out, what would you say is the number one like thing that like the top three things that Amazon sellers should be focusing on, but
Mhm.
they aren't when it comes to profitability? Like, first of all, we know Amazon sucks at showing all the fees. Like,
Mhm.
it is like you have to do some rocket science to really like pin down every single fee that's going on in Amazon to like
Uh-huh.
see all those things. Because on
Yeah.
like you might see like, oh, we're getting $100,000 in revenue on gross revenue, but
Mhm.
net like that's a whole different story. So please
Yeah.
tell
Yeah.
me tell us what we should be focusing on there.
Exactly. So first of all, I laugh because I literally spent hours on the Seller Central website looking at the policies for overage fees and capacity manager, and the bidding for capacity manager, the new thing that's replacing restock limits. I spent hours on the site. I created my own spreadsheet, built out
Yeah.
formulas just to try to understand, because we wrote a white paper all on fees. And I'm not the normal average person. I'm strange, weird person who likes to do those things and likes to, so the average seller is not going to ever do that. So
hmm
the formulas are written in such a way, and the policies are written in such a way, so you can't really understand that. So you really need to start breaking it down and really get a grasp of what the repercussions are of overstocking, of we all know the repercussions mostly of stocking out,
Yeah.
but overstocking is a huge problem. So I would
Mhm.
say the overstocking side of things needs to be paid attention to, and then also the the supply chain, how you can regain your profit across the supply chain by
Mhm.
optimizing your cartons and your packet and your pallets. And then lastly, something that I talked about with Tomer at Prosper was this. He did a case study actually, and I helped him with some of the math on it for resizing your products.
Yeah.
And if you can shave it, half an inch off here, half an inch off there, or reduce the weight in some way, you might be able to qualify for a lower fulfillment tier.
Yeah. And it goes a long way. I had a client that they put all their chips in a pre-box. Like they did this pretty box thing and it looked great, but since they had so much like space in the box, it wasn't like they didn't basically what they ended up doing is taking each bag out individually and
Yeah.
then like letting Amazon do it, and that changed their business. They saved
Mhm.
like a total of $3, which is like
Wow.
30% of the third. It was like 30%. Like $3
Yeah.
doesn't sound like a lot, but it was like that's 30%
Per
of the cost.
unit, that yeah, that
Yeah,
that that ends up being a lot. Yeah, I had a
yeah,
similar story with my friend Travis Ziegler, who you may know. He had a similar thing with a sunglasses case or a sunglasses, and he moved them from a hard case to a soft case, and ended up saving $70,000 per year just on that one SKU.
that's insane. That
Yeah.
is insane. Yes, it's really important to go through that audit and really
Mhm.
like see what you can do there and just
Mhm.
play around with the sizing.
Yeah.
And you had a really interesting take like about overstocking because like we did like 6 months a year ago. we talked about restock limits. Like that was
Mhm.
horrible. Like especially
Yeah.
during COVID, like we were like some clients had 14 units. That was their max. Like you can't send 14 units in and be profitable. It was
Yeah.
just horrible. And the restock limits were killing us on Amazon. And now we're at a point that we can send like a ton. We can send a ton of
Mhm.
units now. So overstocking is actually an issue. So that's really fast. I didn't realize that till now that
Mhm.
overstocking is actually an issue because before it was stocking in was the issue.
Yeah.
So it's really
Yeah.
interesting how it's opposite now.
Yeah, everything is shifting. Like the fees are all shifting against overstocking. So, we have
Yeah.
aged inventory fees, which was introduced as an idea. Amazon introduced the fee last year. They started at the 9-month mark. And then this year they moved it to the 6-month mark. And
Mhm.
so every month that fee is increasing. It starts at 50 cents per cubic foot at the 6-month. You know, the next month it's $1. The next month it's $1.50, and then it jumps up to $3.80, and then $4, and then $4.50, and then $6.90 on top of your monthly fees. So they're
Wow.
just stacking. We call it the Amazon fee stack because they just stack these fees one on top of the other. And then you have overage fees if you go over your max capacity for capacity manager. So it's just there's so many reasons not to overstock. I call it the silent killer, actually.
Yeah. And I've used so stocked and the variables is just amazing because that is the hardest part is to predict the future.
Hmm.
And what I liked about so stocked was the ability just to influence so many variables of
Hmm.
seasonality, of price, and everything else. That was a really big game changer in my opinion.
Hmm.
You guys almost take I don't want to say you guys take account of every variable, but I would say most variables that you guys have in there that's like I'll say this. You have the most variables that you can have that make sense. Like I'll just say that. Like you're doing the
Yeah.
most you can is really what you're
Uh-huh.
doing. And I really like that.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's why why I wanted to build the software is because all the other tools out there were using these formulas, these secret black box formulas where you didn't know what was going into it. They just spit out a number and they said, trust us. This is your
Mhm.
number. And
Yeah.
they took past data, which is, I say the inventory forecasting is a science and an art. So if you're just taking the past data, that's the
Mhm.
science part. But then what about all the marketing and all the, insights that you have with, how your products are doing? All of that is not being taken into account. And so that's why we built So Stocked, and we did it with a lot of influence from the community. So it wasn't just my ideas; it was other sellers' ideas.
That's great. I love that. And like what would you say another piece that people should be focusing on
Mhm.
that goes a long way when it comes to maintaining profitability? What else would
Mhm.
you recommend?
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned carton optimization and pallet optimization. Those pieces, when you can end up wasting a lot of money because you're not properly optimized. Uh,
Yep.
Oftentimes, when we go and we launch a product, the carton is figured out by our supplier. So
Hmm.
when your supplier figures that out, they really have no basis to figure it out. They go, oh, this is these are boxes that I can get relatively cheaply, so I'm going to get these boxes. These are factory standard boxes. So that's what they put them in, and then it it's possible to have it in such a configuration that you can't fit so many on a pallet, and then you're not using all your pallet space, and then you have more cartons than you maybe need. And so it's important to understand there's a way to optimize your cartons and your pallets to get as many units per carton and as many units per pallet as possible. The more units per carton you have, the less cartons you have per order. So if you're paying
Hmm.
carton handling fees, every time that box is pulled off a shelf, every time that box has to be labeled with an FBA shipment label, you're going to be charged for it. So
Yeah.
if we can reduce the total number of cartons that we have per order and the total number of pallets, you're going to be reducing a lot of those fees, especially and particularly if you are using a 3PL.
100%. 100%. And what would you say like like a 3PL doesn't make a lot of sense. I usually like use a 3PL when it comes to a backup scenario, but
Mhm.
FBA is pretty competitive like when it comes down to any 3PL. What are your thoughts like on like having that 3PL, and like I obviously think you should rely more on Amazon. There's
Mhm.
pros and cons to that, but what do you recommend there?
Yeah. So I usually recommend something that I call logistics flexibility.
Hmm.
If you have the space, and now more people have space with the capacity manager, but if you have the space to send inventory direct to Amazon,
Hmm.
cutting out the middleman, you're obviously going to save money there.
Yeah.
I always think that you need to have a backup, like you said, in case anything goes wrong, you have a backup at your, at some external warehouse. And you should also have an FBM solution so that Amazon's not your only distribution channel. But
Yeah.
as far as logistics, it can be worked out to have a little bit of buffer with your supplier. So if you order, on every 2 month basis, you might want to change that to every 3 months and have them hold 1 month of inventory, just in
Yeah.
case anything goes wrong. If you're using, especially if you're using a container shipping, because
Yeah.
if anything happens, we've had some disasters happening at the ports over the years. So then you can usually negotiate with your supplier to not charge you for storing your inventory. And usually you can also negotiate that they will pay, that you will only pay when it ships. So you pay, like, for example, 30% down on the entire order, and then you ship the first, 2/3 of it, you pay that 70% on that shipment, and then you only pay the rest of the balance of that invoice when the rest of that inventory ships. So that will help you with balancing out cash flow, and then dripping it into Amazon more consistently could save you more money than if you sent everything to your 3PL.
Yeah. 100%. And like when it comes down to the fees, is there any fees that an Amazon seller should be constantly looking at, or like a part is their KPI, like maybe either once a month, like what, like, yeah, let's say that, like every once a month, what
Mm-hmm.
fees should Amazon sellers be looking at that are a good indicator on something?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I would say starting to get an understanding of what your overstock fees liability is, and
Hmm.
because that's the thing that could creep up on you. It's actually something that we're going to be releasing probably next week in
Cool.
So Stocked, is like these overstock uh, uh, columns to show you how much are you going to be paying if you don't change what you're doing with your current inventory based on your current velocity.
Yeah, that's great. That's really cool. And what would you say from like another, like, I guess I'll say this first. When it comes to the returns, that's also a good way to maintain profitability from
Mhm.
like Amazon losing a portion of the inventory. Amazon loses like 1 to 3% of all your inventory.
Yep.
And like it could be good to use a refund manager to kind of get
Mhm.
some of that funding back.
Yeah.
And that could be a good opportunity also to like increase profitability for when Amazon loses your inventory.
Hmm.
That could be a good one as well on
Hmm.
that side.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And we work with obviously Carbon Six owns or acquired So
Mhm.
Stocked, and so they also acquired a company called Seller Investigators, which, it's important to understand, like, even if you have a service or you're doing it in house, that getting those free audits to see if another service can find more cash, because that's been something that was kind of eye opening when I saw them Seller Investigators come on with Carbon Six, is being able to locate even more money than before.
Yeah, 100%. And like, is there anything else? Like, what has been top of your mind lately when it comes to profitability? Like,
Mhm.
you talk with a lot of people, obviously. What are your conversations that you're having right now to kind of like help increase that a little bit?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that because inventory has been such an issue for people in the past, setting up systems is very important. And you should have systems for, if you're about to stock out, what do? You should have a report that comes and says, here's the SKUs that are at risk of stocking out. I call this stock out risk report,
Hmm.
slow sellers report, liquidation report, overstock report, all of these things that help to sound the alarms,
Hmm.
and for inventory to start as a team to start being more proactive, less reactive than they usually have been. and then sending that data to the marketing team, because if the marketing team's marketing something that's about to stock out, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and like, do you think that a seller should be looking at their forecasting every single month of like seeing where they're at and seeing if they're going to go out of stock? Do they do that on a product by product basis?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because I feel like they'll have to go through each one to see like, oh, is this product going to go out of stock? When are we gonna have to send more? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what do you recommend on the process wise? That
Yeah.
should they be looking at this every 2 weeks, every month? How does that
Mm-hmm.
process work?
Right. So you want to look at how much inventory you currently have. It depends on your business how often. It could be monthly, it could be weekly, depending on the pace of your business. But you need to look at how much inventory you have, the formula, how much of inventory you have divided by your sales velocity. And
Yeah.
we always do something called daily adjusted velocity, which
Mm-hmm.
is you have to adjust for sales spikes and stockouts that aren't going to repeat themselves, or that you don't want to repeat themselves. So
Yeah.
you take your inventory on hand and your adjusted velocity, and then that will give you how much inventory you have, right? Your days of supply. So okay, if I keep going this way, I'm getting 0 day is whatever. It'll give you the date of when you're going to stock out. And then you need to factor in your buffer stock, right? Let's say
Mm-hmm.
30 days of buffer stock, and then your lead time, let's say 60 days. If you add
Yeah.
those two numbers together, buffer stock plus lead time, that equals your reorder point. So you need to reorder in this scenario 90 days before that stock out date.
And how fast is Amazon being able to restock? Because obviously, like, it used to be 2 weeks before COVID,
Mm-hmm.
and like less than that, like sometimes a week, and like it was really fast. And then like after, during, and after COVID, it was sometimes 4 weeks, and on the busy months, it was like
Mm-hmm.
6 or 7 weeks. And it like
Yeah.
one of my clients, it was like 12. Like I don't even know why. It was like 500
Yeah.
units. Anyway, what do you recommend, or what is the average time right now?
Uh-huh.
For to kind of get from the point where it gets to Amazon's warehouse for them to process it. Like, how long is
Mm-hmm.
that taking right now?
Yeah. I mean, we haven't had many complaints.
Mm-hmm.
So usually people say, it's fairly average to what it used to be. But of course, Prime Day is coming up,
Yeah.
and when Christmas comes along, things start to shift. So Amazon's let go of a lot of their workers in
Yeah.
recent months and in the
True.
past year. So there's less capacity. Uh, it's one of those things where you should keep an eye on it. It's fairly normal right now, but once you start seeing that there's, could be problems, or if there's a, important event coming up, you may
Mm-hmm.
consider approaching your shipping a different way, which
Mm-hmm.
is say there's actually reasons why Amazon takes so long to check
Mm-hmm.
in, and there are things that you can do to kind of get around some of those things.
So when it comes down to overstocking versus stocking out, like I assume that you're gonna say you I like to rather overstock than understock. Like can you go into more about your that risk inventory risk management plan that you were talking about? I'd love to hear more about that. Like how does that kind of work? Love to hear more of that.
Yeah. So stock out risk report, that would be something that would identify what are the products that you're going to be potentially running out of. What is the
Yeah.
game plan? And there's a couple of things that the inventory team should be doing, obviously, and then the marketing team should have advanced warning on this, because there's a stock out that could be avoided, and there's stock outs that can't be avoided. If you've got like a 7-day stock out, for example, that's probably something that you could avoid. So the game plan would be for a marketing team, okay, let's turn off coupons. Let's reduce the ad spend in, some of the less profitable ads, kind of start to pump the brakes while making sure that you don't drop in the rankings, right?
Yeah.
And if you can't avoid this, many sellers like to really ramp up and actually speed up the stock out process, because they want to close their listing at the top of the rankings. They don't want to slowly lose ranking and then close their listing, and because essentially closing your listing can help to lock in your page ranking, so that when you come back, usually it'll get you right back to in the similar page ranking. Every now and then, and this is the danger of stocking out, you have some, freak incident of just that product never recovers, which is why some
Mhm.
people like to overstock versus stocking out for that reason.
I didn't think that strategy worked anymore, like closing the listing. I know it used to work, but I didn't know it still worked up to today. You still see that?
That's
That
what,
it
yeah,
works?
that's what we've been hearing. Yeah, that it still works to an extent. And then the other thing that you should consider, because if you have a bad IPI score, it's important to try to preserve that. And so stocking out will hurt your IPI score. A hack that I learned from Vanessa Hung
Mhm.
was just to strand your inventory instead. So if you've got like 5 units left, closing your listing on 5 units or getting your listing, you know, uh, flagged for, let's say, an image, if you remove your main image or you make your main image violate in some way, like no white space or something, then
Mhm.
once your listing is marked inactive, you've still got those 5 stranded pieces of inventory left. You're now, in terms of your IPI score, it's affecting your stranded inventory versus your in stock rate. And in
Mhm.
stock rate is much more impactful to the IPI score, so you take less of a hit on your IPI.
That's really smart. That's really, really smart. I would have not have thought that. Huh. That's really interesting. And like when it comes down to it, how do you recommend sellers that how do you recommend should they break down their fees to understand how truly profitable they are? Like cuz
Mhm.
obviously Amazon does not make this process easy. So
Yeah.
what do you recommend to find those exact fees and see exactly how profitable you are?
Yeah. I mean, there's a fee preview report, and sometimes you have to make up your own grids to add all of these things together. That's actually something that I think we're working on right now. Eventually, that's something that we're hoping to have within SoStocked. But
Yeah.
understanding the size, and I would say keeping an eye every now and then on your dimensions, because if your dimensions are off, you could be being overcharged in fulfillment. So you should know what you expect in terms of what your fulfillment fees are, and then every now and then go through that fee preview report, because that's what Amazon's actually charging you, because they measure on their own. What you put into the back end of your listing isn't always what they're charging you on. If they remeasure and they find, that it's a little bit off, they might bump you into a higher weight tier. So that's sometimes something that you have to go and get it corrected, get it remeasured, and fix it. So that would be one aspect of what to look out for, and everything starts from your dimensions, your size, and your weight. Fulfillment
Yeah.
fees are going to be charged on size and weight. Storage fees. Storage fees is an interesting one that I think, yeah,
Mhm.
like we said, people don't really pay attention to that. When they
Yeah.
look at their profit, they don't really add Amazon storage fees into their profit. So adding
Mhm.
that will help. And then I was really curious about what how do you disperse your storage fees across your entire order if you keep your inventory in, let's say, for 3 months and it's churning, right? You're constantly churning through
Yeah.
inventory. You actually have to look at, okay, on a per unit basis, is there a way to calculate this? And I melded my mind figuring that
Yeah.
out, and built a little calculator and figured out a multiple. There's actually a monthly multiple that you need to add every single month that you have that inventory in stock. And that multiple is, like, obviously it starts at 1. The first month that you're charged at a multiple of 1. And then
Yeah.
every month after that, you're charged at another half multiple. So 1, 1.5, 2. So in 3 months, you can disperse every single one of disperse the expense across all units to be 2. So you're going to pay double across all of those. Some of them you'll pay once, some of them you'll pay 1.5 times, and some of them you'll pay 2 times. Or sorry, the first month you'll pay once, the second month you'll pay twice, and the third month you'll pay 3 times. But if you
Mhm.
disperse it across all of those, you're going to end up having paid twice on every unit on
Wow.
average. So
That's
yeah, it
pretty
was
cool.
one of those. I was like, I'm sure that there's a mathematical equation for this, and I sat down, figured that out. So that's something that I think that you can sit down and look at. What are you paying on a monthly basis per product, and then how long are you keeping it in there, and it'll change your
Mhm.
profitability. You'll start looking at, wow, I'm actually paying 8 cents per month, so I'm actually 3 months in, I'm paying 16 cents per unit.
Wow, that's amazing. And what would you say, like, is there anything else that has been top of mind for you that you've been wanting to communicate out? Like either from Prosper Show or
Mm-hmm.
just from like an inventory profitability perspective. What's been on
Mm-hmm.
top of your mind lately that you've been wanting to communicate?
Yeah, I think just looking at your business, um, and doing the hard things, or the things that everyone's looking for, the quick win. And
Yeah.
there are some things that you can do. We've talked about some of these things. They take a lot of work. So,
Yeah.
but they can end up having a huge impact. You resize a product, and we're actually making it. Right now, I'm wrapping up with some of my developers a product resizing tool, because it's hard to figure out what those next tiers are. Obviously, we know the large standard and the small standard. We know if we reduce by half a pound, that's going to
Mhm.
reduce our fees. But when dimensional weight comes into play, that's a
Yeah.
whole other ball game. And
Yeah.
ask me how I know what I spent my last weekend trying to figure out for this tool.
Yeah.
So being able to see, it's in some cases, you just have to shave off. One of the examples I ran was 25, just over 25 cubic feet, which is a quarter
Mhm.
inch on each side. So if I shaved a quarter inch on each side, it would get me into a lower tier because of dimensional weight in some scenarios. So those are things that you have to start to figure out. And then
Yeah.
once you resize your product, if you're able to reduce the packaging, or as in Tomer's example, he gives for his Angry Orange
Mhm.
case study, was
Yeah.
to actually resource a product. And that's the hard step, but it trickles down to, you can put more units per carton, you can put more units per pallet, and your fulfillment fees go down, your storage fees go down. It affects everything. So
Yeah.
those difficult things of redoing your product, redoing your carton dimensions, your pallet configurations, they're not quick wins, because you have to
Yeah.
do a lot of legwork, working with actual people. And it's not just as easy as flipping on an ad campaign. Not that that's easy, like that's not my forte at all, but
Yeah.
it's just a long drawn out process. But the amount of money that you can save, like we mentioned at the beginning of of our talk here,
Mhm.
is huge. So taking that time to do that can be very impactful.
What would you say, like, is there a way to easily see the difference between the two? Like I know you would have to use a crazy Excel sheet
Mm-hmm.
to basically see like, okay, here's my dimensions of this product right here.
Mm-hmm.
And like just use this, like this product right here. But like let's say if I wanted to shrink this Sharpie by half an inch, hypothetically, and to see the differences like long term between the two, is
Mm-hmm.
there like I just Excel is the only way to calculate that, right? Like there's no other, from what I
Yeah,
know, correct?
yeah. So that's the tool that we're going to be releasing. It'll go on our free tools site. So sostock.com/tools. We'll be releasing, I think, sometime next week, and we
Mhm.
do all of that. I built that out in
Cool.
a spreadsheet, and then I gave it to my developers, and they figured out how to actually turn it into a tool, and it'll show you the savings. It looks at weight only first. Like if I reduced the weight,
Mhm.
what would I be looking at? And sometimes when you reduce the weight, it doesn't even make it put you into a lower tier because of
Mhm.
dimensional weight. So sometimes there's no option to just reduce the weight. Then you look at size. Can I just reduce the size? And will I be able to, how far will that get me? And then you look at size and weight together. So it gives you three different options, and you'll be able to look at like what is the easiest. Because if I can reduce by a quarter inch, and that gets me into a lower tier, versus having to reduce by 3 pounds, that's a
Yeah.
lot more difficult. And then it'll run your what's your per unit savings, and then what's your 30-day savings against what you're currently sitting in.
That's really, really interesting. And before we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to make sure that we either talk about, a point that you hit on, either when it comes to fees, profitability? Is there anything else that you have in mind?
Yeah, maybe just to circle back to Amazon and how to get your check-in times increased or sorry, decreased, how to improve your check-in times. Uh, Understanding that Amazon owns most of the trailers that go into Amazon. There are a couple of things in play. They own most of the trailers, or they have a contract with some of these carriers that says you have to, if we don't have space to unload immediately, you have to drop your trailer. And usually it worked well. Drop your trailer and leave. Pick up an empty trailer and leave. Do it all over again. And you had these owner operators doing it that way, but that doesn't end up working when they get a backlog. And so your stuff, you talked about, 6 weeks, 12 weeks, your stuff can get parking lotted, basically. And if you want to get around that, it's more expensive, but it's something called live unload. So if you ask your freight forwarder, your 3PL, can you tell me about live unload? What would it cost me? It's not something that you necessarily want to do all the time, but if you've been having trouble, or if you are worried about that because you've got a big holiday coming up or something, it's worth looking into. And what that is when your truck arrives and pulls up, it unloads directly into the warehouse. So your delivery date is very much closer to your check-in date because the stuff is going directly into the warehouse.
And what are the pros and cons to that? Obviously, like there's some pros to that, but what are the cons of using that?
Yeah, costs more. So it costs more. And then the other thing is that it's not through Amazon. So Amazon doesn't insure it. So if it gets lost in transit, until Amazon takes possession of it, they won't insure it. So they won't give you anything back for missing inventory if you didn't buy through, their network. So just make sure that you have that insurance coverage, or that, your carrier has that coverage for you if that's something that you're worried about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's really interesting. Well, Chelsea, thank you so much for coming on. It was really interesting having you. Please tell the audience how to contact you and where to find So Stocked.
Sure. Yeah. So you can go to sostock.com/connect. My socials are there. You can send an email. We've got a demo for So Stocked. So if you're interested in learning more about So Stocked, there's some links there. And then all of our free tools are listed there as well. So if you are interested in any of the tools we talked about, the product resizer is coming out next week, like I mentioned. But we also have a carton pallet optimizer. So talking about, how do we resize our cartons and reduce the total number of cartons, and how much could you actually save? It. We'll go through all of that.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. And thank you everyone for watching. We will catch you next time. Thank you so much.